statutes and in the bond of that time that's still kind of hovering out there in space, it reaffirmed, in fact, didn't reaffirm, it established and strengthened the area of origin protection language that had been in the codes for some time, the strongest that we have ever had. I would ask that those be taken into account. And notwithstanding recent provisions in AB 104 that I fear would allow the usurping of historic senior water rights, and I argue even pre-1914, be very careful about that. That has some severe consequences. And I think that the area of origin has application even to the Folsom situation. In 1958, and I've actually read this decision 893, it added a term to the reclamation permits that ensure, quote, a American River water to adequately supply the applicants naturally dependent on the source. And similarly then, or in the same part, prohibited exports, quote, that interfere with the fulfillment of the needs of Placer, Sacramento, and San Joaquin counties. I would ask that those provisions be considered in whatever the plan may be. The governor's drought orders also provide for protecting communities' public health and safety, an issue that even before I speak here, you were already considering that related to Montague. So I clearly know that you are sensitive to those concerns. But those issues are clearly at play here. The decisions that will go forth now from the board and the Bureau can very significantly compromise the safety of the public. And I argue that that must be a very high priority. The governor has so announced, and I believe that you're showing your sensitivity here to Montague indicates to me that other communities such as Roseville may find comfort. The public trust, and this is a really big issue, I've referred to it already. The public trust is long established and settled in water law. And what I mean about that is, in fact, area of origin. I fear that there may be a legal foundation attempted to be created to allow the usurpation of those historic rights for pre-1914 senior water users. And I argue that we need to be very careful. Also related to the settlement agreements. People make agreements and they have cause to feel that those agreements will be abided with and that there will be trust in the future. If we as a state, and in many areas, and I'm not being specific to the board at all here, I see it just about everywhere, this trust with the public is being breached. And that is kind of a fearful time. We need to reaffirm the trust and the faith that people have in their government and the agreements therein wrought. And so in accounting for whatever you will be deciding related to Folsom Lake and the water supplies, I would ask, Madam Chair and members, that you take these issues into account. Proceed with caution, understanding that all things that you do have a significant precedence. And we are in precarious times. I've lived and farmed through, I think, about 5 different droughts. Next year, if it's a dry year, will be the worst that I have ever been through. It's a trying time. But do pay heed to these communities that suffer, but as well, I'd argue, pay heed to our agricultural industry. Thank you so very much for your courtesies and the time and the indulgence of the community of Roseville.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for coming over here to join us. That doesn't happen very often, and we really appreciate it. So next, do I have cards from? There we go. Okay. City of Roseville, City of Folsom. You can take which order you like. And the San Juan Water District here as well? No? Okay. Okay.
Good morning. We have a couple photos that we're going to show. I don't know where the mouse is.
It's right over there, actually.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, great. I think there's one that starts it. Maybe not. Oh, there you go.
No, it's coming. Nope.
Okay.
And that's Pauline Rakucci.
Yes. Yeah, I'm Pauline Rakucci. I'm a former mayor and current council member for the city of Roseville. And first, I want to thank the board for its leadership during the unprecedented drought. It's a very tough decision and situation you're in, and I certainly appreciate the challenge you have in front of you. I also appreciate the opportunity today to express my deep concerns over the current and projected operations of Folsom Reservoir, a federal facility that our city relies upon for its water supply. With the city of Folsom San Juan Water District, the Folsom Reservoir serves about 500,000 people in total. And on February 6th, we saw a Folsom Reservoir that has a capacity to hold 977,000 acre-feet drop to 162,000 acre-feet, or just 27 feet above our water supply intake. And let me see if I can get my picture. This is a NASA picture that you may have already seen. It was taken on January 16th, so the reservoir was even lower on February 6th. At about 100,000 acre-feet, Folsom Reservoir becomes a dead pool, which would render Roseville residents and businesses and the communities served by the city of Folsom San Juan District with little or no water supply. Before the one significant rainstorm in February, there was a very real possibility that our water supply intake was going to go dry at some point this year. This situation is simply unacceptable, dangerous, and if it weren't for this being saved by this rain in February, it would have led to an economic and social impacts in my community and for the state as a whole. As you hear from our experts that will, excuse me, will be providing their comments today, we are deeply concerned that the planned operation of Folsom Reservoir for the rest of this year will bring our reservoir so close to the margin that it will tempt another potential dead pool to the reservoir. While we certainly understand that this drought year presents operational challenges, we need to have assurances that reclamation not only is planning to operate for the wet normal years, but appropriately planning for what could be another dry 2015 season. The State Board has been very concerned about the state and federal projects' ability to meet public health and safety of communities served by the Delta exports. We are asking for similar consideration. While we understand that reclamation has many goals that they're attempting to meet, we are asking that you require reclamation to prepare an operations plan that specifically demonstrates how they will manage Folsom Reservoir to meet the needs of 500,000 people in Roseville, Folsom, and San Juan. You'll hear more details about this request from our speakers today. But again, thank you for considering our request and also your leadership in this very, very difficult time.
And thank you as well for joining us. We're honored.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Short, District Director for Assemblymember Beth Gaines.
Oh.
And the Assemblywoman asked me to come today to present her position on the fact that it is critical for the Bureau of Reclamation to operate Folsom Reservoir in a way that best ensures the reliability of water supplies for the city of Folsom, the city of Roseville, and the San Juan Water District. The reservoir is the primary water supply for the 500,000 customers of these three agencies, and therefore is critical for the economic health of the region. Assemblywoman Gaines has been monitoring the issue and was very concerned this past January when Folsom Reservoir reached historically low levels of water storage with no rain in sight. The Bureau of Reclamation's proposed plan, which could result in going into next year with the reservoir's initial level significantly lower than in 2013, also causes Assemblywoman Gaines great concern. That is why, on behalf of the 500,000 people supplied by the three agencies before you today, Assemblywoman Gaines encourages the State Water Board to require Reclamation to prepare an operations plan that maximizes the amount of water held in Folsom Reservoir to avoid running out of water to serve the needs of the region. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Next, I have your cards, but I don't know what order you're coming in, so.
Chair Marcus, members of the board, thank you very much. Marcus Yasutaki, Environmental and Water Resources Director for the City of Folsom. Thanks again for having us here today, and as Councilmember Rakucci pointed out, you can see some of our concerns that we have going into next year. The cities of Folsom, Roseville, and San Juan Water District are doing their efforts in part of a conservation plan for the region. We are all at a mandatory 20%, minimum mandatory 20% reduction from our water customers. We are all currently meeting or exceeding those goals as we speak today. San Juan Water District is a wholesale and a retail provider. Two of their agencies, Fair Oaks Water District and Citrus Heights Water District, do have access to groundwater, so they have been available to them for accessing their groundwater supplies. City of Roseville does have a small pocket area, I believe, on the west side of their city that has access to aquifer storage and recovery water. City of Folsom doesn't have any groundwater. There's a little spot out at the golf course that has supply, but doesn't meet the needs of, residential and commercial customers. So we are doing what we can as our agencies to help with this process, but as it's been pointed out, there are concerns of going into the end of this year with storage at the end of September projecting to be anywhere between 70,000 to 90,000 acre feet lower than we were at the end of September last year. So those are our primary concerns moving forward as our agencies here today. We all have water supply contracts with reclamation, which if water is physically available in the reservoir, we can access. Roseville and San Juan Water District do have other contracts with Placer County Water Agency to move water from Placer County Water Agency into Folsom Reservoir, but again, the water needs to be available at the water supply intake to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. So if we don't have the water at the intake, which can go dry right around 100,000 acre feet, then those opportunities are limited. We are working as our agencies with other agencies to enhance or improve intertie connections with those that have access to groundwater so we can move water between agencies. City of Folsom's working with Golden State Water Company with an intertie that's along Folsom Boulevard to take advantage of groundwater that Golden State Water Company might be able to move into the city of Folsom, but it's only a limited supply up to a certain portion within the city. So we're doing what we can this year, but one of our key concerns, as we mentioned, is what happens going into the end of 2014, the beginning of 2015, if we encounter another dry year. Because as we've seen, if we start 70 to 90,000 acre feet lower, and we got to 162,000 acre feet, that's 90,000 acre feet at the 70,000 acre foot, or 50,000 acre feet. And that's below the intake with limited or no access to the drinking water supplies for our 500,000 customers. As part of the state board's process, the real-time drought operations team was created with reclamation, DWR, and the fishery agencies. Although they have created a plan that goes through November of this year, again, our concern is what happens if we do have a dry season going into next year. We've had some meetings with reclamation at the end of last week just to get a better understanding of the requirements that they have, what the operating requirements are, what their needs are that they need to be met as a system. But we'd also like to have more dialogue on what the specific requirements are that they are putting into the plans so we understand how we need to plan for the rest of the season going into next season. So again, we would request that the state board require reclamation to develop an operations plan for 2015 if we have another dry year. Thank you for your time.
Right, sure.
Just one question. The governor's most recent drought proclamation identified 4 areas that really go beyond the 20 by 2020 actions that were required in 2009. And one is that that outdoor watering would be limited to no more than 2 days a week, and avoiding the use of water to clean sidewalks and parking lots and hardscapes, turning off fountains unless you're using recycled water, and limiting vehicle washing at home and encouraging people to patronize recycled water washing automobile washings. So I would urge you to look at those if you haven't already, and institute something fairly quickly that goes along with that, that goes beyond 20 by 2020, because clearly 20 by 2020 isn't enough.
Correct.
That's what we're finding out.
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
I know as I could speak for the city of Roseville, Folsom, and San Juan, is we have a combination of those variables within, for Roseville and Folsom, within the municipal codes, and then just in various agenda items that have been passed or resolutions for San Juan Water District. So I know for the city of Folsom, we are on 2 days a week, odd, even addresses,
Good.
and that sort. So I know we are implementing those in our various stages.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, that's great. Thanks very much for joining us. I have 2 more cards. Ryan, or I feel bad. Is the mayor going last? Or are we, mayor? Sorry.
First of all, Ryan
You know,
Becerra,
mayor's rule. I'm from local government, so I would have,
I-
had I read all my cards, I would have called the mayor first.
I would have never stepped in front of the mayor. Except, like the chair, we've had some traffic issues this morning, I believe. So.
Oh.
Ryan Becerra from Barkowitz, Chronic, and Shanahan. We represent the city of Folsom, city of Roseville, and San Juan Water District. Senator Nielsen actually covered most of the points I wanted to cover, so I just wanted to very briefly say, you know, we are in a situation here, given how low the lake went last year, how close it came to the outlet,
Scary.
and, you know, where the projected start for this coming year is 273,000 acre feet. So this is what that level of the lake looks like. This was from last February. But this would be, under our understanding, the projected end of September storage in
Right.
Folsom, where we would start. So just on the legal points, we are in a situation that really does key into the human right to water. You know, the legislature adopted that policy that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water adequate for human consumption, cooking, and sanitary purposes. You know, that's the kind of level we're looking at here. You know, if it hadn't rained in February, our agencies were looking over into a very dark place. So this is the importance of this issue to these agencies. Now, for the legal background, Senator Nielsen again covered that very generally and very nicely, but to bring some detail to it, Folsom and San Juan both have water rights that date back to the 1850s that are reflected in settlement contracts with reclamation. 33,000 acre feet for San Juan, 27,000 acre feet for Folsom. Those can only be delivered if the intake stays wet. So, you know, we hear a lot about settlement contracts in other places. We have those on the American as well. For Roseville, when reclamation was applying for its water right permits in the 50s, Roseville was too. And in D893, the Water Rights Board provided for Roseville and others by adding terms to reclamation's contracts, or excuse me, to their permits that cover those contracts. So we believe there is a very sound legal basis for requiring an operations plan to show how Folsom, Roseville, and San Juan will be supplied water. Because at this point in time, it's, you know, hopefully it rains. But it is a little dicey, and after this last year's experience, everyone is very concerned about keeping that intake wet, among other things. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for also specifying the mechanism through which we would make that request. I was going to follow up on that, so appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, so the mayor hasn't made it, so. Well, that was dramatic. Did your
Right
car
in the
die
back.
too, just like mine, or you hit
Pardon?
traffic? Did your car die too, like mine?
No,
or-
unfortunately not. But thank you for having me here. I'm Carrie Howell. I'm the mayor of the city of Folsom. And in my other real life, I'm also an engineer. So this has been a very,
Okay.
very concerning issue for me personally in the city. As you've heard from the other speakers, Folsom, Roseville, and San Juan Water District rely on Folsom Lake. And in the case of Folsom, the city of Folsom does not, we don't, the city's original name was Granite City. We're sitting basically on granite, so there is no groundwater. That's not even an option for us. So we're working on interties with other agencies so that we can move water around in the region. The previous speakers have already told you that our major concern is that we don't want to find ourselves with 25% less water at the end of this September than we had last year. The daylighting of our intakes is a very, very serious issue, again, especially for Folsom, because we have so few other options. We put our conservation measures in place in December of 2013, so we've been doing that. The odd even watering, that's been going on a long time. and we've made significant strides with regard to conservation, but at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that regardless of what that 500,000 water users in Folsom, Roseville, and San Juan do, we can't conserve our way out of this problem. The amount of evaporation out of Folsom Lake is almost twice what all of those 500,000 people use for water. So it's significant. So it's very important for us that the Bureau be given the leeway to operate the lake and the dam in a manner that retains water so that we're not looking at our intakes daylighting sometime in November. So I'm making the same request that you've heard from everybody else, and I appreciate your time today. Thanks.
And thank you very much. All right. It is just about 10 after 10. Oh, thank you so much again. Great. I think we may end up breaking a little after 10:30 if we do this, but I think we should get started if that's, or should we take a break now? Yeah, well, there'll be more cards, I'm sure, by the time we're through. Let's start with, I mean, we could just take a break now and then start at 10:30, but it's up to you all, pacing-wise. I'm looking at my colleagues, see if they want to start and then break. Let's get started. Okay, I'm fine with that, too. This is a pretty formal workshop. I'm going to follow, I'm going to read more than I normally do, just to be clear with everyone on how we're doing. And, of course, welcome to this informal workshop to receive comments regarding, 1, temporary urgency change petition filed by the Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to modify water right requirements of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project, and 2, the Executive Director's order approving the petition, including the various modifications to each. The workshop is being held in accordance with the public notice that went out on April 25th, and today we'd like input on the Executive Director's May 2nd, 2014 revised order and any changes that should be made to it, including whether the order adequately addresses issues raised in previously submitted objections and petitions for reconsideration, given all the updates. The State Water Board exercises continuing supervision over temporary urgency change orders and may modify or revoke them at any time. This is an opportunity to provide input on 1, the urgent need for the changes, 2, whether the changes may be made without injury to any other lawful user of water, 3, whether the changes may be made without unreasonable effect upon fish, wildlife, or other in-stream beneficial uses, and 4, whether the changes are in the public interest. We'd also like to hear your feedback and suggested modifications to the order to better protect the public interest, health and safety, and beneficial uses of water, as well as prevent the waste and unreasonable use of water. This is an informal workshop only. State Water Board will not take any formal action today, and there will be no sworn testimony or cross-examination of participants. The board members and its staff may, however, ask clarifying questions of speakers. Following this workshop, the State Water Board may reconsider the Executive Director's order approving the temporary urgency change petition on its own motion based on information received today or in response to petitions for reconsideration. We're broadcasting this workshop on the internet and recording both audio and video, so please be sure that you speak into the microphone, she said. This is one of those do as I say, not as I do. We're going to begin with an introduction from State Water Board staff, followed by a presentation from Department of Water Resources, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We'll then hear comments from the public. To ensure a productive and efficient workshop and ensure that all participants have an opportunity to participate, oral comments may be limited to 5 minutes. If you intend to speak today, please fill out a blue speaker card and give it to the clerk. If you're not sure whether you wish to speak, fill out a card and mark it if necessary. Let's move on to State Water Board staff.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. My name is Diane Riddle. I'm the Environmental Program Manager for the Bay Delta and Hearing Section. I'll start by providing you an overview of the temporary urgency change order and the various modifications to that. We'll then move on to the presentation from the real-time drought operations management team to provide you an overview of the drought operations plan. We'll then cover the public input, including suggestions on modifications to the order to better protect the public interest, health and safety, and beneficial uses of water, and to prevent the waste and unreasonable use of water, and on the required findings of fact, including the urgent need for the change, whether the change may be made without injury to other lawful users of water, whether the changes may be made without unreasonable impacts on fish and wildlife and other beneficial uses, other in-stream beneficial uses of water, and whether the changes are in the public interest. So we received the original petition for change on January 29th and issued the original order on January 31st, following which we made several modifications in response to precipitation events and input from the public. So far, we've received approximately 61 various comment letters, including protests, objections, comments, petitions for reconsideration. So in the January 31st order, the State Water Board, or the Executive Director, approved modifications to the Delta Cross-Channel Gate requirements, allowing for flexible operation from February through May 20th of this year to reduce the need for releasing water from upstream storage to repel salinity in the Delta. We also modified the Delta Outflow requirement to 3,000 CFS for the month of February. And along with that, instituted export restrictions to 1,500 CFS or health and safety levels. We required that the various changes be coordinated through the real-time drought operation management team. Had a condition requiring that conserved water be held in storage for future beneficial uses. Also required a water balance to help inform future decisions, laying out the proposed operation for the following months under different drought conditions. And we required monitoring and modeling to help inform real-time operational decisions. And in that order, we indicated that additional modifications may be made, as has occurred. So the first modification that we made following storm events in early February was made to clarify that exports could be allowed above the 1,500 CFS level, provided that the requirements of D1641, the water right requirements that were modified, were being met. The exception to that was that those additional exports were limited to natural and abandoned flows, again in an effort to help to conserve storage. The next modification we made on February 28th extended the Delta Outflow modification into March. Following which we made a modification on March 18th, which provided additional flexibility to export water when some of the Delta Outflow requirements were being met, specifically the requirement to meet outflows of 7,100 CFS, but not additional flow salinity requirements included in Table 4, often referred to as the X2 requirements. That order also clarified the use of exported water and required the bypass of water from the project reservoirs to satisfy prior water rights. So I'm not going to go into the details of the real-time drought operations or the drought operations plan because the real-time drought operations management team is going to do that. Just generally, the drought operations plan lays out the Bureau and Department's plan for operations through November 15th under two scenarios, a very dry scenario, the 90% exceedance level, and an average scenario, and talks about the installation of barriers, which I think the group will go over as well. So following receipt of the drought operations plan, the board made, or the executive director made several modifications to the temporary urgency change order. On April 9th, we extended the order, the Delta Outflow conditions modifications into April. Following that, on April 11th, we made modifications to the San Joaquin River flow requirements. We provided for a modification to the pulse flow requiring 16 days of flows at 3,300 CFS and 15 days at 1,500 CFS. The requirement was between 3,100 and 3,500 approximately CFS for that 31-day pulse flow period. For the period prior to the pulse flow beginning, we required the flows to be at 700 CFS. Following the pulse flow period for the remainder of May, flows were required to be at 500 CFS. For June, we required the Bureau of Reclamation to operate in compliance with the NMFS Biological Opinion and to meet other water quality requirements, including dissolved oxygen and salinity levels. Then on April 18th, in order to allow for increased exports while this additional flow was coming down the San Joaquin River during the pulse flow period, we allowed for exports to be made up to 100% of San Joaquin River flows on a 3-day average. This is consistent with an existing condition in the Water Right Decision 1641. It's just this condition wasn't operative because of the other modifications to the export constraints that we made in earlier orders. So now moving on to our most recent modification that we released on Friday. The May 2nd order acted on the remaining issues from the drought operations plan that we hadn't acted on previously in April, including remaining issues from an April 9th request and an April 29th request from the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources. In addition, the April 29th request requested renewal of the temporary urgency change after the current expiration date of July 30th. The Water Code provides that that temporary urgency changes can be renewed for an additional period. So in addition to the renewal, the May 2nd order modifies the Delta Outflow requirements in May and July to 3,000 CFS. The requirements, I believe, for both months are 4,000 CFS, so it's a change from that. Also acted upon a request to modify the salinity requirements on the Sacramento River at Edmonton to move the compliance point 3 miles upstream to 3 mile slough, again in an effort to conserve stored water. In addition, we acted on the request to modify the Sacramento River flow requirements for the protection of fish and wildlife for the fall period, September through November 15th, modify those flow requirements from between 3,000 and 3,500 CFS to 2,000 CFS. Additional conditions we included in the order was to require the bypass of inflows when the order was in effect in order to protect other legal users of water and minimize impacts to fish and wildlife and other beneficial uses of water. In addition, we updated the export limitations, just removed some old language that was no longer applicable, and added some dates for reporting requirements on the water balance and the water conserved under the change. So on to next steps. We're requesting comments on the May 2nd order by May 13th in the event that we want to make modifications. Comments related to the renewal are not due until June 2nd. So I mean, I think essentially we'll accept comments all the way through June. We'd like them sooner, such that if the board decides it wants to make modifications to the order or the executive director does, that we have those in hand and are able to consider them in that process. But we'll accept comments through June 2nd.
But if we act before June 2nd, we might have to modify based on what we get. Explain how that works.
Yeah, I think that would that would be the case, that if there are additional significant issues that are raised after, say, you wanted to act before the June 2nd date and we receive a comment on June 2nd, then we would have to look at those comments and determine whether additional modifications are warranted. So following this workshop, we plan to prepare written responses to comments. We were hoping to get those into the May 2nd order, and due to the number of comments we received and the complexity of those comments, just weren't able to do that in time. Wanted to make sure that we had an order available to the public for them to consider, and at the same time we have read all of those comments and have considered them along the way and have made modifications to the various orders in response to those different comments. So lastly, if there are additional outstanding issues that can't be addressed, the board can hold an evidentiary hearing at a later date if necessary. So with that, here's just some information for the public. If they're looking for more information on the temporary urgency change, it can be found on our website. Also, if members of the public want to receive additional updates regarding the temporary urgency change or other drought-related matters, they can sign up for our email distribution list at the link noted above. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'll take any questions you may have.
I just have a quick question on slide 8, Sacramento River flow from September to November. What was the original requirement and the source of that requirement? And is there a compliance point?
I want to be sure I get that exactly right for you. The source of the requirement is Water Right Decision 1641, Table 3, and again, that's a Fish and Wildlife objective, and the requirement during September is 3,000 CFS. During October of critical years, it's also 3,000, and in November and December, the requirement is 3,500 CFS. Again, this change would only be effective through November 15th, which is the end date for the drought operations plan as well.
Okay. Thank you.
That was a Fish and Wildlife standard for fall traction flows for salmon.
Oops. I'm sorry, were you asking about the Rio Vista or the compliance point for the salinity standard? Or no?
You've answered my question. It's okay.
Okay, you answered. Okay.
Question that maybe the next panel can answer, just following on that and some of the earlier discussion. The drought operations plan goes till November 15th. Presumably there's a plan for working on what comes next in case it doesn't rain, apropos of what some of the cities ask. Can you give me an update on that, or should I wait for the Bureau and the department? Just as a heads
I
up.
think there's, the intent at this point is to maintain minimum carryover storage levels at the end of the season, such that you could have minimum supplies moving into next year, provided that it is drought and it is dry. So that is next year is incorporated into the drought operations plan. The actual modifications that might be needed to Decision 1641 or different Endangered Species Act requirements, I think they're going to wait and see, what exactly is needed before they put forward a plan for those issues. But yeah, it's the storage levels are definitely part of the drought operations plan, and also
Right.
something that we're monitoring to make sure that the levels that are actually included in the plan are actually the levels that are achieved every month, to determine whether additional action may be needed related to that issue.
So whether the estimates of depletions and the like are correct or not.
Right, yeah, that plays into it, or operations turn out as expected.
Right. But I just would, it may be a discussion for another day as opposed to what we're talking about today, but I would hate to wait until, even though it'll take some time, I would hate to wait until November 15th to see if it's going to rain or not before even beginning to do the scenarios on what ifs. So I'm presuming that people are planning to do that.
Right, yes.
I know we've been 24/7 on dealing with it now, but at some point we do all collectively have to get ahead of the curve and spend some time on scenario planning.
Yeah, and I think that has been done, and that played into what the Bureau and Department determined they would need for minimum carryover
Right.
storage levels at the end of September moving into next year. They looked at what are their health and safety needs, what are the needs for repelling seawater from the delta or from the ocean into the delta, and determined that the carryover storage levels included in the drought operations plan were those minimum levels. Now, as to exactly what relaxations you might want to different flow requirements going into next year, I think that's, they do consider a couple of different scenarios in their drought operations plan. I'll let them go ahead and go into that, but they do consider if it does end up being a drier year next year, that there would likely be the need for additional modifications to requirements, although they haven't
Right.
laid those out yet.
I'm just saying, since we had to do things on the fly, or you all had to do things on the fly in this emergency, I think there will be no excuse for us not to lock ourselves in a room for a number of days to play out scenarios well in advance, as well as be able to put out scenarios for public consideration and discussion ahead of time. We don't want a repeat of this year next year. So
Right,
that's
and that
all
was-
I'm signaling,
yes.
and I think that's what was being
Totally
asked.
agree.
But I think we need to get that stuff on the calendar now, and if it rains a lot and we don't need to use it, we cancel them. But I think we're going to need to do them in the summer, not do them like
Right,
this.
and again, I think they have done some of that, and the key piece to that is the storage level. That really is the key component, and then working out, what are your minimums, and minimums go into, assumptions about what things you would change, what different requirements you would change. And I think under different scenarios, if it's an average hydrology, maybe you wouldn't need to change very much, but if it turns out to be dry, then you probably have similar changes to those that you have this year.
Mhm. Okay. Thanks. Other questions?
Perhaps this will be covered with the next panel, but just in case, could you walk through the potential implications for water quality and fisheries as a result of the first 3 changes there?
So along with the requests that we received for, in addition to along with the drought operations plan and the requests that we received on April 29th, we received some fisheries analyses that showed the potential for some impacts to delta smelt related to temperature and food supply, but that those impacts would be, reasonable given the different trade-offs. And so I can let the fish agencies can probably speak better to those issues. They did provide concurrence letters with both the drought operations plan and the modifications to the April 29th order. So the Sacramento River flow requirements during the fall period are primarily aimed at salmonid species. Again, NOAA Fisheries can probably speak to their analysis around that issue. The changes to the Sacramento River at Emmeton requirement, that's an agricultural salinity standard. And the analysis that we got from the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources is that the water quality would still be adequate for irrigation purposes.
So that will be covered in the next panel.
I believe so.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Diane. Let's bring up the panel now. John Lehigh from DWR, Paul Helliker